Hey everyone, thanks for tuning in to the first episode of Two Composers, One Channel. We're really lucky to have a fantastic guest for our first ever show, Dr. Maria Grenfell, who is a composer and the head of composition at the Tasmanian Conservatorium of Music, where you and I both did our undergraduate degrees. So we'll have that discussion with Maria a bit later on, but let's set our topic up first. What are our key discussion questions?
So today we're talking about a triad of questions: what makes a good teacher, what makes a good student, and what makes a good composer.
I think what makes a good teacher is someone who is able to point students in the direction of music and composers that have solved compositional problems that the student is facing in their work, because that's a great practice for the student to get into, and it can really make them a self-sufficient learner going forward. Yeah, what else do you think apart from that?
You have to be able to motivate students. A lot of composers, a lot of teachers rather, have this, what I call the child switch. And basically it's when you start talking about their pet topic, something they get like just nerdishly excited about, and it's really wonderful, and you would just want to go and compose. You're like, oh, I want to get out of the lesson now so I can go and compose. I think that's really, really important, being able to motivate, but there's a discipline element to it as well.
And I think that leads really neatly onto the second question of what makes a good student. A really good student in general, I think, is an ability to know when to defer to somebody that has more experience, to be willing to accept that something they've done actually might work better a slightly different way, and then to be able to balance that with having an inner strength and conviction about their own musical identity. What do you reckon?
Well, put some notes down for a start, because I mean, you can't make the most of your teachers unless you're prepared for your lessons and making progress between lessons. And hopefully, if they run out of things to say, you've got some questions and problems that you want to solve in the piece as well. Like you want to make good use of their time. Yeah, it's tricky, but I would say that working hard and reading widely about all sorts of different disciplines like orchestration and theory, and getting to know lots of music as well.
Yeah.
So what do you think you need to do to develop into a composer from there, from being a student? What makes a good composer?
The easiest way to answer this is by talking about technique. And in many ways, a lot of the things that make for a good student, wanting to know a lot, being curious, being willing to work hard, are things that flow through to and are common to almost all good composers. Beyond that, what makes a good composer is really tricky. I mean, what makes John Cage, with his, pieces which are just completely silent, a good composer, is incredibly different even to someone that he was good friends with, like Morton Feldman. It's different stuff that makes both of them good. And I'm sure Maria will have a lot more to add on this, but what do you feel you can add to that?
I guess I would add that foundation is what you square with your kind of like your musical soul, almost, like your very, very inner workings and how you feel about certain things musically, and like your musical philosophy and that sort of thing. So the more of that foundation that you absorb, the better your chances of absorbing something that's going to help you. After all you've done that, I think how you present yourself and your scores matters. For your creative vision to have the best chance of working, you want to make good use of everyone's time. You want to be very respectful of people's time, and you want to be musicians, and you'll get a more representative recording or performance of your creative vision if you can put all that together. Yeah, I mean, should we talk to someone who has put it all together multiple times?
Let's do that. So Dr. Maria Grenfell is the head of composition at the Tasmanian Conservatorium of Music, She was born in Malaysia, and then she studied in New Zealand and in the United States. She's worked with all sorts of fantastic musicians and many of the major orchestras. And she also had the misfortune to teach both Tom and I during our undergraduate degrees. Let's bring in Maria. Look, thank you so much for joining us for our first ever podcast. We've been chatting about these 3 questions around what makes a good teacher, what makes a good student, what makes a good composer. First of all, though, as someone that's been a teacher to both Tom and I, what were we like as students? How annoying were we?
Oh, you two were great students. You always had work to bring to your lessons. You always did lots of thinking, lots of listening. I think those are really important when you're a composition student. And I'm very proud of how both of you have gone on and continued doing composition beyond your studies at UTAS. So that's great.
Can we stop filming? I'm crying a bit.
I remember Tommy came in as a pianist, but you sort of sneakily showed me some pieces that you'd been writing, and you said, well, I really would like to do composition. And I said, great, let's do composition. Yeah, Angus, you were always a composer from the beginning, weren't you?
Look, I was, but I have a very strong memory of coming to you in first year, and I'm pretty sure I'd drawn a chart to explain to you why the mark you'd given me was wrong. Do you remember this?
I don't. I must have blocked it out, but
I probably shouldn't have reminded you.
But I do recall that in first year we usually put students through their paces, and I know we were doing that with you. And I know that you were kind of you really wanted to try some different things, and so I think that was probably a bit of a challenge, throwing down the gauntlet to you to say, well, yeah, you're good, but you could be better, and here's the mark that we're going to give you. So sometimes it's a little bit of a, carrot type of scenario.
Yeah, well, look, I mean, that leads fairly neatly into what we wanted to talk to you about, what makes a good teacher, and is what you mentioned then a good practice, do you think, the carrot on the stick?
I think it is actually. I think a little bit of tough love doesn't cause too much drama. At the same time, I think one of the most important qualities in a composition teacher is the ability to listen and to empathise with a student. But giving them a challenge, especially when you see that they have the capability of rising to that challenge. I think it's important to think across a longer period of time, whereby you get the students to compose for a wide range of instruments. I think it's useful to give them small tasks at the very beginning when they haven't got a lot of experience composing, or they haven't had a lot of tuition. A lot of composers are fairly self-taught from the beginning, but they've got a little spark, or they've got a little technical know-how. And so starting small with maybe a couple of instruments at the very most. And also, I think you want to give them a task that that they're going to really enjoy. So you might, instead of giving them something way out of their comfort zone, give a student a few little composition tasks that appeal to their sort of sphere of experience, and then kind of gradually you can push the boundaries out a little bit further. So I always get students to write a chamber piece of some description for, say, 1 to 3 players. I always also get them to think of who they would ask to play a piece that they've written before they even start, because there's no sense in writing a piece for instruments that we don't have, or you don't know anyone who plays them. It's much more fun to work with your friends.
So you've had some, you've studied in New Zealand and then in the States. And you've had quite a lot of teachers, some of them like quite well-known composers. Are there in particular standout teachers or ways that some of them went about it that have stuck with you, or even differences in the way that composition has been taught in different countries?
I think in all the schools where I attended and taught at as well, there is a fairly sort of methodological approach, sort of step by step. and also briefs given to composers or fairly strict parameters as well. I know one of my colleagues who was a teacher of mine, he assigns his students, like a variation piece, and you must write an orchestral suite based on Baroque style dance movements. So quite specific. And that tends to be quite common over there in the US, the way of teaching composition. And I think it is part of the whole sort of graded approach to gradually writing a big piece with, a fairly big length, but also bigger forces than just a small chamber ensemble. When I was studying at a more advanced level, it's not at all like that, but at undergraduate level it is. So they're training students, to keep a compositional journal, to work on their counterpoint and their voice leading, to be able to write particular pieces with specific briefs and parameters in terms of mood and tempo and all that kind of technical stuff that is really important to get under your belt as an undergraduate. So then once you graduate, if you go on and do composition, you can have a lot more freedom because you're capable of writing more complicated things.
And how do you deal with that inevitable moment where a student arrives and they've got really different stylistic aims to yours, and you're in a position where you have to give advice for their expressive aims, even though they might be different to yours. That's always really difficult as a teacher, I've found. How have you sort of dealt with that?
Yeah, I think that is very difficult. I think you need to, that's where you need to have empathy, and you also need to be able to try and look at the piece from their point of view, but also how it fits contextually within the same style by other composers. So just sort of looking at other examples of what the student is trying to do, and also taking note of pieces that have inspired the student to actually compose in a very different way. I would certainly not want students to be coming out thinking that they have to compose exactly like their teacher. Nobody really wants that, I don't think. So I would, encourage a student to go, in their own direction. And also then you can be particularly helpful by kind of being a devil's advocate for certain techniques that you look at the score and think, I've got more experience and I think that that's not going to work. And so you work on how the notation is actually presented. One of my teachers used to say to me that, composition teaching is a lot of proofreading. And he's absolutely right. You are actually proofreading a lot of your students' works. And a lot of the time it's because they haven't put an instruction in as clearly as it needs to be. And so regardless of the style of the music, you will encounter that. So that's where you can be helpful as a teacher too.
Yeah, I think that the practical side of composition, the notation, the craft is the side that in some ways it's a little clearer to see how you go about teaching that. Whereas you may have students that come in that are fairly proficient on that side, but need a little bit of help in opening themselves up to be more creative and adventurous. And that's certainly feedback that I received from the review panels in various years. Are there particular ways of going about that? That's a bit trickier, I think.
It is tricky, yeah. In that respect, it's often, you kind of need to get inside the composer's head, because you're wondering what they're thinking and how can you encourage them to bring out their expressive ideas, even if they can, do everything technically that you ask them to do. I think that's a very tricky thing. It's probably got to do with rapport between the teacher and the student. I think you can also encourage students to perhaps approach a piece in a slightly different way. Try something new that's gives them a little bit of a challenge in terms of their craft. I remember having a lesson once with one of my regular teachers who, you know, I thought I'd done quite a decent job of you know, progressing along in a piece that I was working on, and she'd already seen the piece before at the previous lesson, so I worked a little bit on it and brought it back, and she sort of said, you know, this is still a B piece. I wouldn't give this piece an A. I'd give it a B still. And I thought, holy moly.
Oh, you should have brought her a graph.
Yeah. Hang on, here's the rubric.
This is why.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Or a pie chart, whatever works for you.
Yeah.
Or more of an old school style of teaching. And I suddenly thought to myself, yeah, actually, I needed that. You know, this piece, I should be doing this. I should be trying this. I should be doing something a little bit to sort of push myself. And I totally understood why she said that to me. So
it's this constant wrestling between sort of feeling confident and then at some point needing not your ego necessarily smashed, but chipped away at just a little bit, just to get you over that next plateau.
Yeah.
So how do you think this sort of thing affects students? Like, what do students need to do to deal with this you know, appropriately? Yeah,
and that's a very difficult one, because if you're constantly being put down by your teacher, it's probably time to find another teacher. But at the same time, you need to just sort of see, ask yourself, I guess, is your teacher actually right? Or do you think that this constant criticism is unjustified? That's a very difficult question, because sometimes there might just be sort of a very basic level personality, you know, discord between the two people. And it's not like they dislike each other, but just that maybe the student doesn't quite understand the method of the teacher, in which case the teacher probably needs to explain why they're saying these things and why they're pointing out things that they are, so that the student can actually learn. And so, as composers, we've got to have a pretty thick skin. Both of you know that. I mean, you apply for a million things and sometimes nothing comes out, and, you know, it's very easy to get disheartened and sort of lose your confidence. Yeah, I think that you kind of have to find a way to just keep going, keep bubbling along, and keep your confidence level up by surrounding yourself with positivity and friends, and you know, maybe try some different approaches, not just to your composition, but, you know, on career aspects, like, you know, go and meet some people, or ring up someone and say, hey, can I send you this? Or, you know, would you take a look at a piece that I'm working on at the moment? I'm having a bit of trouble understanding what my teacher's wanting from this. Sometimes that just a fresh pair of eyes might help.
Do you still seek feedback on pieces from other musicians, composers on a regular basis?
Yeah, I do actually. Yeah, I do. I don't really like showing my work to people when it's at the early stage, but when it's like almost finished, or when I've sort of got a good chunk of it done, I do like to play it to someone else, or show them, I might send them a score or something like that. My family members, actually, I you know, they're the first people I call upon. My husband's a musician, and I always play him my pieces in progress, and he's always got some really interesting and sometimes unexpected comments, and yeah, I really appreciate it.
So you're still a student yourself in many ways.
Yeah, I think you are. I think, you know, you're always progressing and changing the way you compose, and you're often writing for different combinations, and so sometimes, you know, that can be a little bit intimidating as well. I've just finished my first wind ensemble piece. It's a very short piece, but I was really scared, because I've written a lot of orchestral music, but, you know, heck, what do you do when there are no violins? And so I sort of, you know, the director of the wind ensemble has been very gracious about looking at, you know, one or two drafts of the piece, and I sent it to him, the final copy, this week, and and said, please let me know if there's anything that needs fixing, if you've got time to workshop any of it.
In our sort of a mini discussion earlier, Tom and I were talking about how a lot of the qualities that we kind of agreed on as being important for being a good student, or common characteristics of good students, tend to be common characteristics of quote unquote good composers as well. But sort of beyond that, we both found it quite hard to actually arrive on any very clear answers about what makes a good composer. Do you have any feelings about that? Like what are some defining features of a good composer, do you think?
Oh, that is a very difficult question, isn't it? I mean, I think it's, having good technical craft is really essential, but having something to say and having, having a voice is really what other composers look for in a composer. And I think that's sort of a combination of what you're writing about, but also the way that you approach the piece that you're writing. I think a good composer is also flexible. They need to be flexible, and they also need to be willing to adapt when required. I think also a good composer is someone who is constantly striving to improve and to make better themselves in terms of what they're actually doing with their craft. But they also have to be a decent person. You have to be a good person to work with and communicate with as well.
I think that's very important, the interpersonal side, because there are no performances without working with a person.
Yeah, that's so true. They
don't really exist unless you're an electronic composer of some sort, and it's about to me it's about being as generous as you can with them about what your goals are. I mean, being encouraging, for what you want with the piece. I know that from writing quite complex scores myself, that encouragement and being easy to work with is essential, because that might be the difference between them bothering with my music and not bothering at all, and in some cases understandably so.
Do you have any advice that you would give to, or that you do give to first years coming into the uni, say?
Play music, play in an ensemble if you can.
Good advice.
I mean, Tom, you're a terrific pianist. Playing as much with other people has probably been a great benefit to you as a composer as well as a pianist. I played violin and piano all the way through high school and university, because that's where you also meet great friends. You meet people who are going to play your music, and you also see scores and parts from the other perspective, I guess. So it helps you work out how you would then present your own music as a composer. And I also used to ask people if I could come to their rehearsals, like chamber ensemble rehearsals, or there was a percussion ensemble. I always tell this story. I didn't have any clue about how to write for percussion, so I found the local percussion ensemble in Christchurch, New Zealand, where I was at university, and I said, can I come to your rehearsals because I don't know how to write for percussion? And they're like, yep, Monday night, we'll see you there. So, and I did that for a few months and learnt a lot. So I would really recommend going to concerts, listening to music, playing music, just being, surrounded by the practicalities of it just as much as the desk work that you do on your own.
So it sounds like composing, learning to be a good composer, and as well as being a good student. And look, heck, even a teacher is a very holistic process with many different angles and disciplines intersecting. Seems quite a complex problem to solve, becoming good at these things.
Yeah, and I think that's why it takes us so long to become a bit more accomplished than we were when we started, and we're constantly getting better, we hope.
Great. Well, look, Maria, it's been wonderful having you on the show. Thank you so much for being our first ever guest and offering such great insights. There's a question that we plan to ask all of our guests, so we'll ask it to you first, and that's: is there a piece of music that maybe not that many people know that you think everyone should know about, that everyone should listen to?
I'm going to start by saying the piece that I mentioned before, which I really like, and it's by Steve Reich, and it's called Electric Counterpoint, and a lot of people haven't heard that piece, but boy, it's a cracker. I like the sense of layering in the counterpoint, and how each part comes in, and fills in these sort of little hockety gaps between what's going on in other parts, and I think the harmony is really beautiful as well. And I love the way it sort of changes key and then comes back again, and changes key and comes back again, and you're not sure when it's going to end, and then it just ends. I think that's great.
Yeah. and also from a composer point of view, though, like everyone should listen to it because it's great, but it's one of those pieces where if you look at the score or even just listen to it, you can actually see what's happening from a composition technique point of view. You can just look at it for 5 minutes. Yep. And you kind of know roughly what he's done, and you could have a go at it. No, great recommendation.
I'll probably say a different piece tomorrow. So I said a different piece yesterday too. So
well done for managing to actually pick one. That's
yes, that's
all we can expect.
Probably the hardest question of all.
Well, look, hopefully an easier one to finish, because I'm sure everyone listening will be really keen to check out your work as well. So what have you been working on recently, and where can people find it if they want to have a listen?
Well, I do have a number of pieces up on my SoundCloud page. If you just go to SoundCloud and type in my name, you will find me. I've been really busy this year. I've just finished a short piece for the Hobart Wind Symphony. Before that, I wrote a piece for music to accompany the narration of a children's book called Little Puggle's Song, and I can't wait to hear that when it's performed in September, hopefully in Melbourne. And that's just for a little chamber ensemble of 4 players and narrator. I did write a fanfare for brass for the Sydney Symphony Orchestra's 50 Fanfares project earlier this year, and I also wrote a flute quartet for a flute group called Pandemonium 4 in Ohio in the US. And I was also one of the composers that Claire Edwards has commissioned to write a marimba solo piece. So that's been an ongoing project since the end of last year, and I've got a couple more pieces coming up this year, but probably SoundCloud, or occasionally I've got a few things up on YouTube as well, like some of the hush pieces that I've written. So
fantastic. All right. Well, so we'll be sure to track down links to SoundCloud, your website, and so on, and we'll put those in the show notes. So definitely encourage everyone to go and have a listen.
Well, thanks for having me.
Thank you so much for coming on, Maria. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Angus. Thanks, Tom.
Thank you.